Politicians always get creamed for changing their minds. But if circumstances change, should politicians not be entitled to change their minds? Monsieur Dion, you're the opposition leader. You've been hammering him pretty good for the last couple of years, so try that one.
Certainly, I change my mind each time I see a better policy and solution for Canadians, and I explain that. But when you make a commitment, for instance, for the Atlantic Accord, for Atlantic Canadians, and you break your word, as Mr. Harper has done, how can Atlantic Canadians trust him anymore? They have a lot of difficulty to trust them, and for very valid reasons. You're speaking about trust. It's also about what we want to do, and to be very clear about what we want to do. And all the plan that we Liberals are proposing is to bring together our economic growth, our environmental sustainability, and our social justice, our environmental, economic, and social goals. Everything will be for that. Okay. Is the plan we need. And it's a matter of trust, too.
Mr. Dion, I remember Red Book after Red Book. Child care was promised, never delivered. Pharmacare promised, never delivered. The GST was going to be imposed. It was left in place. Fair trade was going to be thrown out. It stayed in place. I mean, you've got a heck of a record there, Mr. Dion, to try and... No wonder we see the cynicism from people out there. And then we have Mr. Harper coming along. He never tells anybody that he's going to give a huge tax break to Exxon in the election. But by golly, that's exactly what he does. And then, meanwhile, people are trying to make ends meet. I remember a time when we said, won't you stand up at least against some of these outrageous fees? And Mr. Harper, you said, yeah, that's a bad thing. Let's send off our ministers to talk to the boardroom tables. The Exxons and the banks of the world told your ministers to get lost. Okay, and you did, and cut their taxes.
Get a response.
That's not defending ordinary Canadians.
Let me just correct a couple of words. First of all, the government of Nova Scotia fully acknowledges that we've respected the Atlantic Accord. I know the government of Newfoundland doesn't, but, you know, they didn't like the previous government either, and that's the position that the Premier has taken. But the government of Nova Scotia is clear. It was mentioned earlier about, you know, big companies getting control of parties. One of the most important things our political party did, our government has done, is we eliminated all corporate union contributions from federal politics. We limited all contributions to individuals, to electors, and at the level of $1,000. I think it's now $1,200. I think that has made our party tremendously responsive to voters. One of the reasons we've got so many supporters out there, and I think it's a good reform for our political system that makes it more responsive. Elizabeth May.
I've got to say, first of all, you did ask a question, Stephen. If Jack hasn't answered it, I'm going to try to answer it. The point is, yes, you can change your mind, but you've got to be honest with people what your reasons were. The reasons on the income trust never added up. There was a very strange Finance Canada calculation that ignored the tax revenue for people who receive dividends from income trusts, so the reasons didn't add up. As for the Atlantic Accord, you may have Minority Premier Rodney MacDonald agreeing with you, but let's face it, Bill Casey still doesn't, and there's reasons that I never will, because the Atlantic Accord was a contract, and it promised Nova Scotians that equalization payments would never form part of the calculation of the revenues from offshore, and you ignored that contract, and Bill Casey showed you the legal reasoning that what you were doing was breaking a contract. He pleaded with you before he had to vote against the budget, and you ignored that because you decide that if a law is something you don't like or a contract something you don't like, you just sweep it across the table, don't you? You just decide it doesn't matter because your word is law.
Okay,
that's no way for a Prime Minister to behave.
Gilles Duceppe.
I think, evidently, it's possible to change our mind, but then we have to explain ourselves. It means that if we made an error, we have to explain and admit we made an error. And I'll ask Mr. Harper, one of the errors he made is saying that Quebec has a seat at UNESCO, which is not true, because only sovereign state has a seat at UNESCO. So will you admit tonight that your ad saying that Quebec has a seat at UNESCO is not true, because Quebec is not a sovereign state?
Let's get an answer. Well, very simply, Quebec has a seat in the Canadian delegation. Quebec has a formal agreement with the Government of Canada that the Government of Quebec is very happy with to give it a role in UNESCO.
Does Quebec have a seat at UNESCO like you're saying?
It has a seat as part of the Canadian delegation.
And it worked, Mr. Layton. We had the child care plan in 2006 because of your coalition with Mr. Harper. It did not happen. It will happen the 14th of October if we are elected. We'll have this child care plan back for Canadians. Now,
we will
have that if we have a Liberal government. That's what I have said. But now, if you interrupt me, I never interrupt you. So, matter of trust. Speaking about trust, it's also to work with others and to not always consider them as enemies each time they disagree with you. let's say the Canadian Wheat Board, the farmers there, Mr. Harper said, because he disagreed with the way they resist to his attempt to dismantle the Wheat Board, that you will walk all over them. You have said that Elections Canada, which is an institution celebrated around the world, instead to work with them, you sued them. The head of the Nuclear Safety Commission, when she said there's a problem of safety, you fired her. This is not the kind of leadership we can accept.
Okay,
we need to have a government that is able to build trust around him.
Literally down to our last minute, he does need a chance to respond to some of these charges. Go ahead. A couple of them on the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. We all know that was a bill before Parliament that was supported by the Liberal Party.
Firing
Canadian
bill
Wheat
before
Board,
Parliament.
on the Canadian Wheat Board, the farmers of this country, farmers of Western Canada, voted to have dual marketing, the same marketing freedom as grain farmers in the rest of the country. That is what we are defending. And that's why, by the way, we have virtually every seat among rural Western farmers. They want the right to be able to market their own products while maintaining a strong Canadian Wheat Board. And that's what we're trying to give them.
That's our time.